Hello and welcome to Life's Booming. I'm James Valentine, and this season we're talking about death. Or on this episode, why we don't talk about it enough. Death is rarely easy to talk about, but avoiding the subject just makes things even harder. From breaking the stigma to understanding the conversations we must have before we die, I'll be dissecting everything we should and shouldn't say about death with two fascinating minds. Andrew Denton is the founder of Go Gentle Australia, a charity advocating for better end-of-life choices, but you probably know him better from so many shows on our TV. And Dr Kerrie Noonan is a senior clinical psychologist and social researcher determined to increase our death literacy. Kerrie, Andrew, thanks so much for joining us. Did you know one another?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, along the way.
We've had a few conversations about death, dying, literacy, all those things.
Yeah.
How did you learn about death? Like, when did you and who did you go to talk to? When did you start thinking about it?
Well, I think you learn about death the way everybody does, which is you experience it. I mean, the first time it happened to me, I made a documentary about teenagers with cancer, Canteen, the support group, and one of those young men died, and his parents very generously invited me to visit him as he was dying. And that was the first time I actually saw what death can be, and it was very hard to see. And then watching my own father die obviously was a profound moment for me because that was an unhappy death. But how I've learned about it since is, I imagine a bit like Kerrie. I've had thousands of hours of conversations with people who are dying and their families and their carers. And I've learned so much about death, I feel I've mastered it and can move on.
Yeah, that's right. And is this what you mean by death literacy? That in some ways we just need to be talking about it more.
It's talking about it. That's one aspect, but it's kind of developing your know-how and being able to put that know-how into practice. So you can maybe talk about, maybe have some competency in terms of talking or maybe doing one element related to death and dying. But when you put it into practice, that's when death literacy kind of really comes to life. It kind of sits, some of the research we've done recently it's evident that death literacy sits in networks, in between people, within people, in communities. So it's not just about individuals.
I suppose I'm wondering about at what point we might have this, or there'd be a difference in death literacy with 20-year-olds than there would be with 80-year-olds, right?
Yeah. Yes. Experience changes your death literacy. That's probably the strongest predictor. So we started this research looking at networks of care and how people kind of come together. And so where we're at now is we're looking at what are the predictors and what are the things that we understand so that we can understand more about how to make more death literacy, I guess. So an example, that's your question. Well, I can give a real example. When my mum was in hospital, we needed someone to help us to move mum from the hospital to home because we wanted to take her home. And we couldn't get the health system or the medical system to do that. So I put an email out, a text message out to my friends who happened to work in the death space. And within an hour, we had someone. Within 2 hours, mum was home.
Right.
And so that took, that set off a little chain of conversations, emails, texts. And while I was doing that, my brother was getting the medication sorted and other things sorted for my mum. So we utilised, to bring my mum home, we utilised like every bit of knowledge and our networks to do that.
But you were at the centre of, you study this, you're an advocate for it, and so you're at the centre of it. You would have a network. I mean, I don't know that I've got the same network. I could put it out to my friends and they go, we could bring wine. Oh, like I don't know that I don't know that they'd be that practical.
But that's actually helpful too. You need your friends to turn up with wine and bread and croissants and whatever comforts. So we found that younger people, for example, so we've done 2 kind of national studies just to kind of demonstrate your point about younger people. Between 2019, pre-COVID, and 2023, we looked at the population and we looked at death literacy and how it changed. And we found that voluntary assisted dying and COVID had an impact on people's death literacy, particularly for the younger people. Anyone who's experienced a death, anyone who's been through loss has higher death literacy than people who haven't. And so there's lots of things that contribute to that. But COVID, I think we're still kind of looking at the data, but certainly voluntary assisted dying, because of the way that you need to kind of have conversations, you need to actually reach out to your networks, you need to talk to doctors. You know, there are actually lots of interactions in that really stretch your skills and your understanding.
Previous generation, it's only a few generations back when death was very present in our life, the conversation about voluntary assisted dying has perhaps allowed us to have that conversation again. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, there's a lovely witty observation that in Victorian times they talked about death all the time and never about sex, and today it's the other way around. You know, and it's not that many generations ago where the body would lie in the house and there'd be a viewing in the house, and so it was a more human thing. The way Kerrie's describing her friends helping her mother come home, that's a communal and human thing. And when I talk about voluntary assisted dying, I must and I want to bracket it with palliative care, because really, despite the fact politically they were oppositional during the legislative debate, they're very much on the same end of the spectrum, which is we're all going to die. And the concept of palliative care, which is also the same idea of voluntary assisted dying, is not let's get you to the dying bit, but how do you live as well as you can while you are dying? And that dying process could be very short or it could be very long. It could be several years. Usually you can't be really clear. So the whole point, as Kerrie said, about voluntary assisted dying and palliative care is you talk about these things. And interestingly, I think there's a paralysis around death. And, you know, you said, well, my friends wouldn't know what to do. They'd bring wine. As Kerrie said, that's no bad thing. But if you put out a call to your friends to say, I need to move my fridge, somebody's going to say, I've got a ute. Yes. Your need, perhaps, to leave hospital and go home, that's the same question.
They might have a ute.
It's just a human question, which is, I need help.
Yeah.
And not only do we get paralyzed in the face of death and assume that the experts have the answers, but the experts often get paralyzed in the face of death. They don't know how to have those conversations either. So one of the things that voluntary assisted dying absolutely has done, and there was a geriatrician in Victoria who said to me he was ashamed to admit that voluntary assisted dying had made him understand how limited his practice had been, in that he had subconsciously only been asking questions of patients that he had an answer to. How's your pain?
Right.
I can treat your pain. What are your symptoms? I might be able to treat your symptoms. Whereas what he asks now is, how do you feel? What is life like for you? That's a much more holistic question. What is it that you need that if we can't help you with, maybe someone else can help you with? So I think it's about transcending that paralysis in the face of death, which is natural, but the greater group that you can talk with it about, the better. Mm-hmm. I still remember a woman I met several years ago, and she said to me, from the moment her husband was diagnosed with cancer to the moment he died, he refused to talk about it. Oh. And it was like a sliver of ice stuck in her heart because she was frozen in that too.
Yeah.
And I think what we found in a lot of our research too, Andrew, was that carers were often had massive networks that the person who was dying didn't know about. As well. So I think that's the other thing about some of these conversations is that once you know that you've got community who's up for the conversation or up for whatever around you, that a lot of carers are can have that access to other people.
And do you mean the person dying doesn't know because they don't ask? Unless they're talking about it, then no one thinks to bring it forward? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think what happens in that situation is a carer can become quite isolated like the dying person. If they don't want to talk about it, there actually are still practical things to organise. There are still things, where are the passwords?
Yeah.
How do you get into the bank account? Yeah. What bills need paying?
I'm trying that with my wife all the time, and she's not even dying.
That's right. Yeah. They continue, but you don't get to have the conversation with the person.
Actually, Geraldine Brooks, a beautiful author, her husband Tony, who was a friend, he died very suddenly, dropped dead in the street, and he was young, in his early 60s. And she's just written a book about this called Memorial Days, about that whole experience. And that's the strongest piece of practical advice she gives, which is prepare for your death by helping others. Yeah. Like, leave the passwords, explain how these things work.
Yeah.
The best things I've learned about the idea of preparing for death and thinking about death, actually, I'm pretty sure came from some of your literature, Kerrie, which was the idea of an emotional will.
Mm.
And an emotional will is not about, to you, James, I'll leave my ute. It's actually about, to you, James, I'm going to leave my favourite city in the world, Limerick in Ireland, and here's some money for you to go there. Or to you, James, I'm going to leave these 5 songs which mean something to me. It's actually about, or this poem, it's about gifting something of spiritual life value as opposed to an object.
Yeah. Following the legislation in New South Wales, now pretty much in every state, Andrew, what do you see now? What do you see in our society now? What do you see happening?
To me, the big question is not so much how individual families or individuals respond, even though it's very important. To me, the big conversation is within the medical professions. And I don't actually say that critically, because we're all equally struggling with the concept of the abyss. And I think it is an acknowledged problem in healthcare, of futile care at the end of life. It's giving a 90-year-old a hip replacement, for example, just over-treating because of I've heard it described as doctor as hero. We give doctors quite reasonably a special place in our society because we ask special things of them. But part of that training is we must win, we must treat. When I was first told this by a doctor in Oregon when I went there, when they said, "Oh, we see death as a defeat," I actually laughed. I thought they were joking. I said, "It's
yeah." You can't win. He turns up with that scythe at some point.
So I think there's a much broader conversation about what is dying and how do we have that conversation with people who are dying. And I think...
I suppose I just thought, I asked that because I have had a couple of conversations recently with people who have who a relative or parent has gone through voluntary assisted dying.
Yes.
And what I noticed was the way they talked about it, in a sense, wasn't much different to, we went to Europe. We had a nice trip. Like, it was very normal the way they said it. They went, I was at my uncle's death yesterday.
It can be. It can be. Dying affects different people differently. There are people that have gone through the voluntary assisted dying process who totally support it and are very glad it's there, but still found the experience traumatic. It's not a silver bullet.
Right.
It doesn't, it's merciful.
Yeah.
And it's peaceful, but it certainly doesn't remove grief, and it doesn't remove, for many people, the unreality of dying. We hear many, many testimonies of families deeply grateful for the way in which they're able to say farewell. And I think that's a very important part of voluntary assisted dying, a genuine ability to say farewell. But people are different. There's one man that insisted, who used voluntary assisted dying, and insisted that he be only with his doctor. And the reason he gave, which I find both beautiful and heartbreaking, he said, I don't want the love of my family holding me back. So, I always maintain when I talk about this.
I felt the same thing. I did the same thing. It's like,
I know.
Huge.
Whenever I've talked about this, I've always maintained none of us know how our dying will be. All we know is that it will be hours and hours alone. And I think that's why I struggle with that philosophy that somehow or other that our dying is about society at large, or about some universal rule that we might be breaking if we don't do it the right way.
Kerrie, I sort of want to acknowledge that you've been through a death quite recently, that your mother died only a few weeks ago as we're having this conversation. As someone who's then spent their life studying this area and thinking about this area, what have you learned from the death of your mother?
It looks similar to what Andrew said before about his colleague, the doctor. I went straight to the practical things, didn't I? Like, it's a kick. Grief's a kick in the guts. Let's face it, knocks you on your butt.
And we are very practical in those first weeks, aren't we? At the moment of death and afterwards. Just
the other day, when we dropped my daughter off to uni, I went to text my mum. As I would usually do, and text her the photo of her in her dorm. And I think this is, I was really glad of my experience because I just sat there and cried for about 5 minutes, actually. I just needed to blubber and cry. I could have sucked it up. We could have just, driven on. But actually it was really helpful just to really deeply acknowledge that moment. That was the first time that I'd experienced that real sense of wanting to communicate with her. So
I hope it won't be the last time you have a deep cry about your mum.
No, it won't be.
No.
It won't be. But when she died, because of the work that we had done, I didn't cry initially.
Yeah.
And this is this individual kind of experience of going through this. I didn't immediately cry. I felt intense relief for my mum. And so I was just reflecting on that. I was like, whoa, I'm not crying. Then I was like, and so there was that. The other thing that is on my mind is that it took an ICU doctor on the day that Mum had 3 Met calls. And if you don't know what a Met call is and you're listening to this is where every registrar, every emergency person on call runs to the bed of the person who is who's being called, who's crashing.
Right.
And she had 3 of those. And by the end, I'm glad I wasn't there because I hear that Mum was very distressed. And it took an ICU doctor to sit down with her and go, what do you want, Maureen?
Yeah.
And Mum said, I'm done. And so it didn't matter that I'd done that with the doctors multiple times, or that she had an advanced care directive clearly stating, do not give me treatment that will prolong my life. It didn't matter that all of those things were in place. What mattered was that ICU doctor who absolutely compassionately just stopped everything and talked to my mum. And it's a pretty brave thing when your heart is failing and other things are happening in your body to say, no more, I'm done. Because that's a decision about you only have a certain amount of time left in your life then. So that doctor changed the course of my mum's dying. And I'll never forget that. And then the compassion at which she called me to talk with me about what Mum had decided, and the checking difference. The other thing that I found is the difference between a doctor with really person-centered communication skills and someone who's focused on getting the job done. They ring and say, hey, I'm caring for your mum. I'm caring for your person. What do you understand about what's happening?
Right.
And every time they
want to listen to you first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Every time they did that, it just gave me an opportunity, even though I know this gig and I've, had calls like that with Google. I've talked 100 times on the other side of that conversation with people, but it just made me realize that just incredible, that empathy, you feel it in your bones on a whole other level when someone is truly going, tell me your story, tell me your bit. The other part was no one asked me or my brother about our experience, our previous experiences, and who we were and what we did and who were these children taking their mum home. My brother's a nurse. I've worked in palliative care for 1 million years. And it was a really interesting thing having to, I just wanted someone to go, hey, have you done this before? And maybe I'm being a bit biased there because that's something that, because I've got a death literacy lens over things and I'm always interested in, hey, what have you done before? Hey, what experiences do you want to bring to this one? What do you know about what you're facing? What do you want to know about next? They were all the questions that I would be asking if I was working with someone. I really wanted someone to ask me those questions.
In a palliative care setting, you would probably have been asked those questions, you would hope. But
hope so.
In a general hospital, maybe not. I think that speaks to 2 things, what we're talking about, which is a paralysis in the face of death and a sense of we just treat. This is what we do. Everybody's terrified of being accused somehow of not having done enough. So I think there's that. And the ICU doctor you described, that strikes me as a perfect piece of medicine. And it absolutely accords with what a beautiful nurse said to me in South Australia some years ago. She was very emotional. She was recording a piece for us about why there should be voluntary assisted dying. It was always instructive to me that the ones that really advocated for it were the nurses, because they're the ones that see the suffering. And she just said, why can't we do the right thing, human to human? And that's why I see this as a multi-generational discussion within the health profession. It's not that people in the health profession aren't humans or don't get that, but it's not how they're trained. But I also think it speaks to the pressures on the health system too.
Yeah.
And in the same way as we're talking about aged care, even though we have a much healthier health system than, say, America, it's still pressured, and we hear stories from hospitals all the time of resources that are built but not used, or resources that are used but are stretched beyond reason. And so I think it's a reflection of all those things.
Yeah.
There was at times, and I think sometimes we don't talk about this enough, is paternalism in healthcare.
Can I explain that?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah, we've covered that, Kerrie. Us blokes know.
No, please do go on. Sorry.
There's a lived experience. Okay. So like paternalism, we just don't have a critical kind of conversation about paternalism in healthcare, and there's that difference between really great care and then, but if you just kind of tip it a little further into, do you really want to do that? Oh, don't you want to be the daughter, not the carer? Like there are kind of there are particular things that happen in healthcare that we aren't critical enough, is what I'm saying. I don't know what the answer is, but I would like the system to be more critical about some of those things that perhaps they take for granted a little. And look, sometimes it would be maybe permission for a family to kind of, be the daughter.
Well, even in my experience, in my cancer experience in the last year or so, I've now done several talks at doctors' conferences and things like that. Yeah. And what sort of strikes me as funny about it is I go, we're thinking of taking an interest in the patient's perspective. Perhaps you'd like to come and talk about the patient's perspective. And you got to go, is this new?
I went on Q&A about VAD quite early in my advocacy, which was a terrifying experience, by the way. And there was another fairly prominent doctor who was strongly in opposition. And I completed what I had to say by basically saying, doctors, it's time to listen to your patients. And this doctor, who was a very good writer, wrote this excoriating piece in a magazine afterwards, just accusing me of being patronizing towards doctors. And I'm thinking, that's patronizing?
Yeah.
I mean, the worst example I know of this, there was a former AMA official, and they held a debate on this internally in 2016 that I had a link to, so I watched it. And he was a geriatrician and a senior doctor. And somebody on the other side of the debate, because he was opposed, had put to him that there's a great public support for this. And he said, and I'm quoting pretty close to verbatim, he said, that's why we're paid $200,000 a year. There cannot be a more you-focused experience than you're dying. I don't care what your religion tells you. In the end, only you are going there when it happens.
Yeah. You've given, is it a decade now to this? Have you been 8 or 10 years?
More, I think.
More,
yeah. There are times, and I'm sure Kerrie would agree with this, there are times I think, I've had enough, Dick. Yeah. Thank you very much. But I would have to say it's been the most brilliant second act for me after show business, far more meaningful to me. The correspondence I've had and the conversations I've had have been so privileged, and the gratitude that we as an organisation, Go Gentle, receive from people whose families had the option of voluntary assisted dying is immense. And so, yes, I am glad, and certainly I view this as the real work that I've done, not whatever I may have done in television. perhaps if I won a Logie, I'd feel differently about that.
I think you peaked at blah, blah, blah. Quite
yeah,
frankly.
I think so. And it was all downhill after that first year. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I almost feel like I need to go and have a good cry. It's been a beautiful discussion. Thank you so much for sharing it with us here on Life's Booming.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
You just wound up. You're getting teary.
Yeah.
What are you feeling?
I'm not entirely clear. I think I'm moved by Kerrie and sort of wanting to experience your grief in some ways, deal with that, or I think I'm feeling you holding it in, and sort of that we need to sort of let that go a bit. So yeah, it's interesting. I think I'm moved by your work as well. Look, we have a funny connection over many decades.
Yeah.
And to observe you go through, to see you transform into doing that work's been quite extraordinary. And I'm probably just contemplating my own death.
And exactly right, James. And during the height of COVID, quite unexpectedly, a very good friend of mine rang me from Victoria, and we knew his wife had pancreatic cancer, which is obviously a very tough diagnosis. And then he said she's chosen VAD and she's going to die on this date. And despite all the thousands of hours spent in that debate to get that law passed in Victoria, which was the first one in Australia, and it was an absolute brutal knife fight of a battle to get that law passed, for some reason it had never occurred to me that somebody who I knew and loved was going to use this law. Yeah. And I remember, despite everything I knew about it, on the day, Jennifer and I, we got out whiskey glasses, we poured a whiskey, we lit a candle. But I remember thinking as the clock ticked down to the moment, it felt very unreal to me. But the strong emotion that I felt at the knowledge in the moment of her dying was not that she had died. It was actually about just the richness of life. Oh my God, life is so rich. And that's what I felt. I just felt, wow, life.
I think that is what you say there is so deeply important, because one of the reluctances around talking about death and dying is not being able to maybe lean into some of that feeling around that richness of life. When we were going through photo albums, there were photos there that, that we'd never really taken notice of before. Yeah. Damn, we wanted to know about them now.
Yeah.
Who was that?
Who are they?
Yeah.
Who are these people? Where are they now? And it does connect you to life in a very profound way, and all of the messiness of that. So, and that's, I think, only a great thing. Watching my children, 22 and 17, be with their grandma. We did a simple thing, put a comb, a brush on the end of her bed, and Mum used to love having her hair brushed. And we just said to the kids, just brush your hair whenever you want.
Gorgeous.
And so that just very simple action just then gave them something to be with her while she was dying.
Human to human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my children did that many times while she was dying. And that's when we would sit and talk about what we did with Nanny and things. And we had, so it's worth leaning into. I guess that's the other thing. It's worth getting the whiskey out and having a think about these things and reflecting in on it, and how and what it means to you and what you want to do.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, James.
Right.
Come on, let's hug it out. Come here.
Exactly.
Come on.
Exactly. Very good. That was a beautiful moment. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks to our guests, Andrew Denton and Dr Kerrie Noonan. You've been listening to Season 6 of Life's Booming, Dying to Know, brought to you by Australian Seniors. Please leave a review or tell someone about it. Head to seniors.com.au/podcast for more episodes. May your life be booming. I'm James Valentine.